In this chapter, we provide an overall view of operations management. Formal definition is the management of systems or processes that create goods and or provide services. If you look at this definition carefully, you'll see that it includes all the processes, all the activities that go on within a business which helps to create goods or service and then ultimately take it to the customer. It involves everything from the beginning till the product is created to finally it reaches customers' hands. So everything involved, like who will be the suppliers of the material, from what suppliers the material will be obtained, till producing and then finally delivering. So because of that, it affects a company's ability to compete in the marketplace. If a company can bring a product faster to the market and take it to the customers early, so obviously they will be much more competitive. So one example is Apple, which is one of the most innovative companies currently. Now, if you look at Apple, they came out with iPad, which came in market 2010. And then the competitors struggled to put together a competing product which can do similar functions, but they were a bit late to the market. One of the competitors of Apple is BlackBerry, and they came out with this playbook, which was announced sometime in 2010, and it was expected to compete with iPad. But after the announcement, customers had to wait and wait for months before the final release date was announced. And in fact, before even they announced the release date for Playbook, Apple announced arrival of iPad 2, which had like cameras and many more features. It was faster. So because they could do all these things from beginning till the end, from creating the products, designing the product, creating, producing, and delivering finally to the customer, their cycle time was much smaller. So other companies obviously had to struggle to compete with that kind of speed. Ultimately, if you have like many such companies in the country, then you can see operations management affects a nation's ability to compete internationally. Now, in an organization, there are three basic functions. You have finance, because any activity needs money. Any resource requires finance. Finance plays an important role, obviously. And then you have operations. So once you have the money to buy machines, to hire people who can work for the company, once you have all that, then those products need to be designed and created. Not only products, even services need to be designed and created. And all those activity needs to be managed, and that is done using operations. Now, marketing also is one of the three basic functions within an organization, simply because what a customer needs or what a customer wants, so those things are captured by the marketing department. So marketing people are in touch with the customers. They look at what are the trends, what type of products people want, and that feedback is given to the operations so that the operations people can come out with innovative products which will sell in the market. Whether it is a financial activity or marketing activity or operations activity, in every department or function you will see there are different types of processes. A very basic definition of process is that it takes an input, adds value, and gives the output to external or internal customer. Now, if you look at operations, different processes actually, they have some kind of transformation or conversion activity. So it could be a milling operations where from a metal, some amount of metal is removed to give the desired specification so that it can go and fit in a maybe car or some other product. Some activity which transforms the input to output, which is more desirable by adding value. So that is the feature of any process. Any process you take, it is there to add some value. If you find within a company that there is a process which is not adding value, the best thing that can be done is to just get rid of that process. Because if it is not adding value, then it is of no use. So every process in a company is there to add value. While it is doing that, people also like to get some kind of feedback, whether it is goods or services. Every company wants to know how it is perceived by the customer. They look at the quality, they measure the dimensions, they do customer service, and they get a feedback. So they can get feedback from the outside that may be handled by marketing department, or even on the process there could be a feedback, whether the dimensions which are being produced are consistent or not, or is there any variability. Using that feedback, some kind of control or adjustment is made either to the process or to the input. So the whole idea of getting data, analyzing it, and using that to make changes in the process or the input, so that always goes on for any value-adding process. For any company, one may see that they produce goods or they may produce services. There may not be a company which is producing something on a 100% basis. If you look at this example here, automobile assembly or steel making, they generate goods, but there is also some amount of service where customers come into contact with people in this company and they expect some level of service. It could be a service after the product is sold. So if there is any amount of failure or some problem with the product, so they expect to get service from the company. On the other hand, if you look at surgery or teaching, they are predominantly service activities, but there could be some amount of goods also involved. Depending on what is the majority, 80-90%, is it goods or services, we can classify business to be either manufacturing or service. So one example of a food processor is given on the next slide, where you have the inputs like raw vegetables. For processing, you also need metal sheets, water, energy, and so on. And the transformation or conversion process is things like cleaning, making cans, cutting, cooking, etc. And the final output is a canned vegetable. So this is something which is tangible. You can see it, you can feel it. So generally, if it is the goods, you have an output which is tangible. But if you are looking at an example of process which is service related, in this example you have hospital process. Inputs could be doctors, nurses, and so on. And the processing, it could be simply examination. So doctor comes and looks at the patient and examines maybe temperature, things like that. And then the output is healthy patient. So if the question is whether we are looking at a particular business, is it a manufacturing or service? So it totally depends on whether we have predominantly a tangible output or the output is basically an action. So if it is more of an action, the business will be categorized under service. If it is more of a tangible output, it will be categorized as manufacturing. So production of goods, you have tangible output, and delivery of services, you have an act. For example, in a hotel, you get a service, you ask for food, and the food is provided. So that's an action. So service job categories could be in the government, which is a lot of people work in that area. It could be wholesale, retail, financial services, it could be investment services, things like that. Healthcare is again categorized generally as service. There could be personal services, business services, education is a service. Now, if you compare goods versus services against different characteristics, so if you look at the first one, customer contact, for goods, generally it is low. For example, when you buy a car in Massachusetts, that car might have been designed in Detroit. Engine may come from some other city. Some other parts may be even coming from Europe or China or Japan. People who are making a specific part for this car, if they are sitting in China, you may never know when you buy a car that who was the person who made a particular part. In a hotel, if you are asking for food and somebody brings you the food, you directly have contact with that person. In manufacturing, generally the customer contact is very minimum, whereas in service, the contact is high. Uniformity of input for goods, it is high, and for service, it is low. It is high because if a company is producing a specific part with a specific dimension, the machine can be set at those values to generate consistent dimension for those products that the machine is producing. You may say variability cannot be zero, but at least the variability will be very low or uniformity will be very high. But in the service, uniformity of input is very low. Labor content for goods is low because things could be automated, but for service, you need people to perform those services. Like if you go for a haircut, you need somebody to cut your hair. Uniformity of output again is high for goods and low for service. Output, as we mentioned earlier, it is tangible for goods, intangible for service. Measurement of productivity is easier for goods and it is very difficult for services. For example, you may be able to quickly measure how many items a machine produced on a particular day and use that number to assess what is the productivity. But it is very difficult to measure it in a hospital, for example. How many patients a doctor or surgeon operated on a given day? If that is the amount of or measure of productivity, it is very difficult to assess simply because the type of patient needing surgery and the complications involved, there could be a lot of variability in that. So if a patient took much more time to be operated, that does not mean that the doctor is performing badly. It may mean that the operation was really very complex. So it is very, very difficult to assess the productivity in those situations, simply because the input is highly variable. Opportunity to correct problems is high for goods. In newspapers, from time to time, we get news like an automobile manufacturer recalled maybe 200,000 vehicles for a given model year and specific model to correct some problem. Or like Microsoft, from time to time, they come out with some modification, some improvements in the software that can help fix some bugs. So those things can be done, problems can be corrected, and the opportunities are quite high. But service, something which is already done, it is very difficult to correct that problem. For example, if you go for a haircut and the person who is cutting the hair spoils your hair due to some reason, it is very difficult to correct that problem because the damage has already been done. So not much can be done about it. You could have a lot of inventory if you are dealing with goods, but for service, obviously service has to be performed and it cannot be stored somewhere. For example, if some seats are empty in an aircraft for a particular day when the flight is about to take place, so those seats, if they are not filled, they are not filled. You cannot do much about that. You cannot keep it somewhere and hold it for future use. Evaluation is easier for goods. For example, if it is a dimension which should be maybe 2 millimeters plus minus 0.01 millimeters. So one can use a measuring instrument to measure whether or not the dimensions are okay. But for service, it is very, very difficult. It's not very straightforward to measure or evaluate the product or service. Because operations management involves so many activities within a company, like producing or creating goods and services up to when it is delivered to the customers, there are so many things to be done. One of the activities is forecasting. Like demand has to be forecasted so that people at the shop floor know how many items they need to produce every day. Even managers, they should know based on the forecast how many people to hire or what machinery to buy depending on the demand forecast. They also do capacity planning depending on the demand, how much capacity is needed, because capacity is something which cannot be changed very quickly. If a company buys a machine which can produce 10,000 items a day, but if the demand increases to maybe 100,000 items a day, at the capacity planning, those kind of projections have to be kept in mind. It's not easy to go from a capacity which can give only 10,000 a day to 100,000 a day. And then once capacity is planned and we know how much is the demand, then scheduling has to be done. Like who will produce those items, what machine will be used, how many shifts will be needed, will it be only one shift a day, two shifts or three shifts, things like that. And there will be inventories to be managed because there could be incoming inventory like before any processing takes place, those items have to be stored somewhere. There could be work in process inventories. So an item has to go through different operations before a final product is made. Every time it moves from one machine to the other machine, it has to be stored somewhere. And then there are people who need to make sure that the quality is at its optimal level. Employees are generally trained from time to time and motivated. Deciding where to locate facilities is another important activity in operations management. Supply chain management, like from suppliers to the manufacturers to the maybe warehouses and finally to the customers. So all those supply chains have to be managed. And similarly, there are so many other activities that go on. Now, if you look at last several decades, in fact, more than 60, 50, 60 years of data. So on this slide, the pink line is the service related jobs and the blue line is manufacturing related jobs. So you can see there is a very clear pattern that manufacturing jobs have been falling and service related jobs are going up. In fact, nowadays, the service related jobs contribute about 80% of the overall jobs available. So one of the reasons why manufacturing jobs are less is there has been a lot of productivity improvements. So in like 40s and 50s, the type of machines that were available, if you compare them to what is available now, so nowadays we have much modern machines and tools and things like that. And the same work which was taking a lot of time, machine time and man time, it has come down drastically because of the improvements over these many years. So because of that, we need to produce same amount of goods, less and less people are needed. On the other hand, service-related activities have gone up, and that is contributing to a lot of service jobs. Another reason for manufacturing jobs coming down is that because of the globalization, a lot of things get done outside the country at much lower cost. A lot of companies go for outsourcing, maybe in China or India and some other developing countries. They do that to remain competitive. Because of the nature of services and also because it is important, like 80% of the jobs are in services area, there are a lot of challenges of managing services. As you know, services are often less structured. In manufacturing jobs, things are very systematic. Somebody who is operating a machine knows exactly how to go about it. Sometimes they have the work instructions step by step, so they can be trained. But in service, things are much more vague. It is less structured. Like how to make a customer happy in a, say, restaurant, because the customers who are coming in are of different nature, different background, in different moods. The same thing might not work with every customer. That poses some amount of challenge. In services, customer contact is high. So all the time people are dealing with the customers. That makes it very challenging. In manufacturing, if a machine operator is making a part, a customer is not standing just next to the machine operator, like how that person is doing and whether the product that person is making will be good quality or not. So the customer is not standing there to monitor everything. But in services, sometimes the customer is just next to you. That makes it much more challenging. Worker skill levels are sometimes lower in services. Services hire many low skill entry level workers. So like if you call people to make improvement to your garden, for example, you have to really monitor sometimes so that they do not make any mistake. Employee turnover is higher in services because they get trained in some service activity, and when they get opportunity, they can move quickly to some other company. Input variability is high, so that we have talked about. Service performance can be affected by workers' personal factors. So somebody who did not sleep well the previous night, and that person has to manage or work with a customer who is furious about something, complaining about some service, that person has to be really careful. Operations managers, they have some very important decisions to make, like what resources will be needed, in what amounts they will be needed, resources in terms of manpower, machines. So they have to make a decision on that. When they will be needed, they have to plan in advance, schedule maybe the production as well as order those items from a supplier, look at what is the throughput time or cycle time. Suppose it is ordered today, they have to look at what is the capability of the supplier. Will the supplier be able to deliver within a week, or will it take 2 weeks or a month, depending on where the supplier is located within US or maybe somewhere in Asia, China, Taiwan, things like that. So all that has to be taken into account. So operations manager has to deal with that. Where the work will be done, will it be done in-house? For example, when Apple designs a product, let's say iPad, there could be parts coming from China or Taiwan. Their operations manager obviously decided that, okay, these parts we can get better quality at a lower cost, probably at some outside company. They give the order to those companies. So that decision has to be made. How it will be designed, whether it is product or service, who will do it? It could be people working on design or production, manufacturing or delivery. So all that has to be decided. Making decisions is not always easy. It involves so many things. For getting some help for making those decisions, in operations management, people use different approaches, things like quantitative approaches or models. They analyze for trade-offs. They use sometimes a systems approach. We'll talk about it. And there are so many things to be done. What is the priority? What should be done first, second? So they have to make a decision on that. They also have to make sure things are being done in ethical manner. A model is basically an abstraction of reality. And models could be physical. For example, before coming out with a product for the final customers, a company generally makes a prototype. For example, when BlackBerry announced sometime in 2010 that they will be releasing Playbook tablet sometime in 2011, they showed one prototype of that product. It was not fully functional model, but it had some basic features. So that is a physical model. So models can be physical, or it could be simply schematic. There could be graphs and charts which are used to represent a product or a service. Models could also be mathematical. Sometimes in forecasting, we can use regression models. So there are various pros and cons of using models. So the benefits are they are easy to use and less expensive. So when you are dealing with models which are easier and less expensive to produce, and then if you want to make some changes in that, it will not be that expensive. When somebody is developing a model, by organizing all kinds of information, they gain a lot of insight. So they understand the product much better, and they can make improvements in much better way. Increase understanding of the problem. So when there is a model, one can understand what problems a customer might have. Like on the tablet, if there are too many buttons, and while using the product, we press some button by mistake. So those kind of errors can be eliminated if people look at those models and they can visualize what can go wrong. It also enables what-if situations. Consistent tool for evaluation and standardized format. But there are some disadvantages also. Quantitative information may be emphasized over qualitative. So because when we are developing, let's say, math model, we depend on a lot of data, lot of quantitative data, but there could be some qualitative information which may be difficult to bake into those models. So that could be one disadvantage. Models may be incorrectly applied or results misinterpreted. So people who are using the model may not be well trained to use the model, or they may misinterpret whatever the outcome we get out of the model. So one has to be careful. Non-qualified users may not comprehend the rules on how to use the model. Use of models does not guarantee good decisions. So there are several quantitative approaches which have been used a lot and are being used a lot. Things like linear programming. So generally companies have scarce resources, whether it is people or machine or material, raw material. We don't have unlimited supply of all those. In every business, people have to use limited resources to perform their work. And linear programming is a mathematical tool that helps to optimize the output given limited resources. There are many businesses where queue is formed, a line is formed. Like if you go to Walmart, if you want to purchase something, you have to stand in line to make a payment. Now that will obviously depend on how many lines they have opened. If there are a lot of customers waiting to check out and there are only maybe one checkout line, then obviously customers may not be satisfied. So there are queuing techniques available to do optimization in those situations where queues are formed. Inventory is important part of any business. So there are inventory models which are available to optimize inventories such that the company loses less money and is able to manage with limited resources. So one example is, what is the lowest number of items we should have in a company before we should place an order from a supplier? How to decide what should be the level, what should be that cutoff or reorder point. There are also project models. In project management, we use techniques like PERT, which is a project evaluation and review technique, and CPM is critical path method, which are used for managing projects. There are also a lot of statistical models which are available, and they are used a lot in businesses. Businesses use most of the time systems approach, where the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. So you can see sub-optimization is not something we do here. If you take an example from basketball, if every player in the team tries to optimize their own possibility of scoring a basket, then everybody becomes selfish and eventually the team loses. So system approach means that every player is ready to sacrifice their position to help the team win. Whenever every player plays for the team, the chances are much better compared to when every player is playing for themselves. So systems approach within a business is that every activity, every process you have in a company, they are contributing so that the overall business wins. It's not that marketing is trying to optimize their processes at the cost of operations. In any business, because there are so many things to be done, thousands of things to be done, somebody has to decide what is most important. There is a phenomenon called Pareto Phenomenon. Now, Pareto was an Italian economist. Pareto did a survey in Italy, and the results showed that about 80% of the wealth of that country was in the hands of only 20% of the people, and vice versa. Like 80% of people had only as small as 20% of wealth. Juran used this concept in the area of businesses. As per Juran, who is treated as one of the quality gurus, 80% of the problems are caused by 20% of the activities. So as per Pareto principle, as advocated by Juran, 80% of the problems are caused by 20% of the activities. This is something which helps a business to prioritize. So once they can identify which are those 20% of the activities they are contributing to 80% of the cost or problems, they can manage their business processes in a much more efficient way. I recall when I was working at Ford Motor Company a few years back, as you know, in a car you have about 7,000 parts. Not every part out of those 7,000 fails all the time. We used to divide the total number of parts into 80-20. So we used to try and find out which are those 20% of the parts which are contributing to 80% of the failures in the field. And then a team of engineers, Six Sigma black belts, they used to take up projects in those problem areas so that they can improve quality, reduce cost, and so on. If you recall, there was a company called Enron. So that is a typical example people give. Enron brought ethical issues to the light. So financial statements of any company, they have to be accurate. It should not mislead the shareholders or stakeholders. Worker safety is important. So management has to consider situations where working conditions do not become too bad for the operators, because ultimately it will affect the company in terms of lower productivity and things like that. So if there is a major breakdown in a machine, there should be effort to restore it. And the operator should not be allowed to try to operate it with a bad condition, because it may not only damage the machine, it may be harmful for the person who is trying to operate the machine, damage or hurt that person. Product safety is important. So a product which is produced by a company, it should be safe to use. It should not cause problems for the user. Like if a laptop generates a lot of heat, it can have impact on the user. So companies should advertise properly. Like they should not say that the quality is going to be very good, whereas the customer gets suboptimal quality. Products and services should be such that have as low as possible impact on environment. Also the community. It should not be such that it affects your neighbors and things like that. Hiring and firing of workers should be ethical. When facilities are closed down, again, it is very important. Ethical practices has to be followed. Although in this course we talk about mostly operations, but please remember that the business operations overlap. It is not that we can totally separate finance out and marketing out and operations. So we cannot separate all these three. There are so many activities where people from operations have to closely work with marketing. Like for example, when marketing is working to forecast what will be the demand for a product, they have to closely involve people from operations, because ultimately those are the people who are going to make the product or create the service. And operations also has interfaces with so many other activities like industrial engineering, maintenance, public relations, managing information systems, and so on. Now, if you look at the historical evolution of operations management, Industrial Revolution started in Britain in 1770s, and then many of the European nations caught up with that. Now, before Industrial Revolution, a person used to do everything, like from start to finish. They would get involved in everything, and then also delivered that product to the customer. In 1911, scientific management came into picture, and one of the popular names is Taylor. You could say like Ford came out with mass production of automobiles, and this mass production was made possible by interchangeable parts and division of labor. For an automobile, for example, if a batch of 1,000 parts are produced, any of these 1,000 could be fit and used in a particular automobile. It's not that for every automobile you have to custom make each and every part. So you can use the parts interchangeably from whatever was produced within a batch. And also in the Ford assembly plant, they used a division of labor where each and every operation, as you know, can be divided into different tasks. And then by dividing it into different tasks, you assign one worker to each task such that that person has to only do that specific activity. And using that, it will improve the productivity per person. So that's what made mass production possible. But then in 1920s and 60s, there was a movement for human relations. The problem was that when somebody is working only on one activity day in and day out, that is not very motivating for a person. And it can also take a toll on the health of the person. There are a lot of theories. Theory X, basically it is a negative view. So it assumes that people are not doing their job. Whereas theory Y means that people are motivated and they like to do their job. 1915, 1960s and 70s, decision models started to being used in companies. And then came the influence of Japanese manufacturers. Concepts like just-in-time, lean manufacturing, all those things became popular. So now, if you look at current trends in business, so some of the major trends are related to the internet. So, for example, nowadays it has become so easy to start a business because of the internet, and using the internet to market your product worldwide. Like as soon as you have a product or a service, you can make it known everywhere in the world. Recently, for example, LinkedIn, which is a professional networking website, it had its IPO, initial public offering, and that IPO was so successful, more than 100% appreciation within a single day. This is basically one example of a service. They provide web services where they allow people to get connected professionally, can recommend their juniors or people with whom you have worked, and things like that. Some of the trends are related to the internet. E-commerce is becoming more and more important. E-business, managing technology. We are living in this kind of world where things are changing almost daily, like smartphones, new type of smartphones coming out almost every week, every month. Improvements in laptops, computers, and so many other things are going on. At the same time, with the help of all these technologies, globalization, management of supply chains from supplier to manufacturer and finally to the customer. So all those chains are linked together and how to manage them efficiently. So that is another trend. So if you recall, when Japan had this earthquake, many of the auto companies, they were in trouble because they were not getting some of the parts that were being manufactured in Japan. Outsourcing is another phenomena. So people get things done outside the company. Agility, like how fast you can respond to the market needs, and ethical behavior. If you look at one of these, which is a supply chain. In a supply chain, you have supplier, and then you have direct supplier, then you have the producer, then you have the distributor, and then you have the final consumer. So supply chain formally is defined as a sequence of activities and organizations involved in producing and delivering a good or service. So although this may be the company you are working, but it is connected with suppliers and so on, and distributor and customer, so that whatever is produced, it finally delivered to the final customer. So one example of a supply chain is given here. So this is about a bread. Stage of production, farmer produces and harvests wheat. That adds about 15 cents. Then wheat transported to mill, which adds about 8 cents. So the total value is 23 cents. Mill produces flour, another 15 cents, a total of 38 cents. This way, the last activity is grocery store displays and sells the bread to the final customer, and that adds another 21 cents of value. So the final value of the product is about $1.29. So you can see that at each stage of the supply chain, value gets added.